There's a white powder that costs $2 at almost any garden center or hardware store. It has been killing garden pests since before chemical pesticides existed. It kills ants, aphids, beetles, slugs, spider mites, squash bugs, fungus gnats, and over 150 other pest species. No chemicals, no spraying schedule, no resistance. The 100th insect it touches dies the same way the first one did. And the global pesticide market generates over $84 billion every year, according to Grandview Research's 2022 industry report, selling you bottles of liquid that stop working when insects adapt to them. A $2 bag of this powder does not stop working, ever. That is not a coincidence, that is math. And there is one thing about where you apply this that almost every first-time user gets wrong. And it is the single reason people try this once, see nothing happen, and never try it again. We will get to it. But understand right now that that one mistake is the only reason this powder has not already replaced half a shelf in every garden store in the country. The pesticide industry in the United States alone, according to the American Chemistry Council's 2021 annual data, brings in roughly $17 billion a year. Not globally, domestically. That number depends entirely on you believing that pest control requires chemistry. It requires a product that insects can eventually learn to survive. It requires you to come back to the store every single season. You cannot build a $17 billion industry on a powder that works forever and costs less than a cup of coffee. The moment most gardeners learn what this powder actually is, not what it does, but what it physically is, the financial logic of why no one handed it to them becomes perfectly clear. That silence is not ignorance. That silence is a business model. The powder is called diatomaceous earth. And before you move on, here is what it actually is. Millions of years ago, tiny single-celled algae called diatoms lived in oceans and lakes all over the world. They were smaller than the period at the end of this sentence. When they died, their shells sank to the bottom. Over time, those shells piled up in thick layers on riverbeds and seafloors. Those layers eventually dried out and became rock-like deposits, still made almost entirely of the original shells. What you buy in a bag today is those shells ground into a fine white powder. Each grain of it, even though it looks like dust, is actually made up of thousands of tiny fossilized shells. And each shell, if you looked at it under a microscope, is covered in small, jagged edges, like broken glass so small you can barely see it. That is the whole mechanism. Not chemistry, not poison, physics. When an insect walks through this powder, those tiny jagged edges scratch through the thin, waxy coating that covers every insect's body. That waxy layer is like a raincoat. It holds moisture in. Without it, the insect dehydrates from the outside in. It cannot drink its way out of this. It cannot evolve its way past it. A cockroach that survived 10 generations of chemical pesticide still dies from diatomaceous earth because its grandparents could not pass down a different kind of skin. There is no gene for immune to being scratched. The University of California's Integrated Pest Management Program confirmed this in their published research on physical pest controls. Diatomaceous earth kills through dehydration caused by abrasion, not chemical action. Insects have never developed resistance. They cannot. That is physics, not biology. Humans and most animals, including pets, are completely unaffected. The reason is size. The jagged edges that are catastrophic for a creature the size of an ant are completely harmless to skin and tissue the size of a human hand. To us, it feels like fine powder. Think of the difference between sandpaper on your fingertip versus sandpaper on an ant. One of those is uncomfortable. The other one ends the ant. The one safety note worth taking seriously is this. Do not breathe it in when you are applying it. Any fine dust, flour, sawdust, baking soda, irritates the lungs if you breathe a lot of it. Wear a simple dust mask when you shake it out. Once it has settled on your garden bed or your plants, it is safe to be around. Now, before we go any further, the mistake. The thing that kills every first attempt. The mistake lives in the first step, not the last, the first. Here's what you need. I want to be honest with you about every number. 1 bag of food-grade diatomaceous earth. This is important. Food grade, not pool grade. Pool-grade diatomaceous earth has been heated until the silica inside it changes its shape into something that is genuinely harmful if inhaled in large amounts. Food-grade has not been heated that way. It is the safe version, and it still kills every pest on your list just as effectively. You can find it at hardware stores like Home Depot or Lowe's, at garden centers, or online. A 2-pound bag runs about $2 to $4. A larger 5-pound bag usually costs between $6 and $8. For a standard home garden, say a patch about the size of a dining room table, 1 2-pound bag is more than enough for a full season of applications. You also need a duster. This is just a small puffer bottle or a squeeze bulb with a nozzle. Some gardeners use an old plastic ketchup bottle cleaned out. Some use a turkey baster. You want something that lets you puff a small cloud of powder in a specific spot without pouring it in a pile. That matters. We will get to why in a moment. If you do not have a duster, you can make one from a plastic squeeze bottle with a few small holes poked in the lid. Cost: nothing, if you already have a bottle. A cheap plastic squeeze duster from the hardware store costs about $3 to $5, and it lasts for years. That is genuinely it. No protective gear beyond a cheap dust mask you probably already own. No mixing, no measuring, no timing windows. Two things: a bag and a bottle. Now here is how you actually use it. And here is the mistake woven into the first step. Start with dry plants. This is the most important sentence in this entire video. Dry plants. Diatomaceous earth does not work when it is wet. When it gets damp, even from morning dew, it clumps together, the sharp edges press against each other, and the powder no longer scratches anything. It just sits there harmless until it dries out again, and once it dries, it starts working again. But here is what most people do. They apply it in the morning, before the dew burns off, or right after watering, or right before a rain. The powder sits wet on the plants, does nothing. A few more pest bites appear on the leaves, and the gardener decides the powder is useless. The powder is not useless. The timing was wrong. Apply it in the afternoon, when the sun has had a few hours to dry the leaves and soil. Not right after you water, not right before rain is coming. Dry conditions. That is the whole secret. That is the one thing. Dry. Once the plants are dry, hold your duster about a hand's length from the surface of the leaf and give it a short puff. You want a thin, even coating of white powder on the top and the bottom of the leaf. The bottom of the leaf is actually more important than the top. Most chewing insects, caterpillars, aphids, spider mites, squash bugs, spend most of their time on the underside of the leaf. That is where the softer tissue is. That is where they feed. If you only dust the top of the leaf, you have only covered half the surface where pests travel. Flip the leaves, dust the undersides. Every leaf, every plant that has pest damage or pest activity. Then move to the soil. Go around the base of each plant, right where the stem meets the dirt, and dust a thin ring of powder on the ground. Not a pile, not a mountain. A thin ring, about as wide as your hand. This catches ground-level insects like ants, slugs, and beetles before they even get to the plant. Ants are particularly predictable. They follow the same trails every single time. A ring of diatomaceous earth around a plant base breaks that trail. The first ant that tries to cross it does not make it. The ant behind it picks up the body chemical signals and changes course. And within a day or two, a well-dusted garden bed has significantly less ant traffic just from the ground barrier alone. Now step back and look at the whole garden. Anything you can see that has pest damage, holes in leaves, sticky residue on stems, white powder trails on soil, those are active problem areas. Give those spots an extra pass. Do not bury the plants in powder. You're going for a light, even coating the same way frost settles on a window pane. Just visible, just there. The first results usually appear within 1 to 3 days. You'll see fewer living insects on the leaves. You may see dead or dying insects on the soil near the base. Some insects, aphids especially, will seem to simply disappear because they have either died or relocated away from the treated plants to find something easier. This is not the powder failing. This is exactly what it is supposed to do. Here is the one thing most people get wrong after the application itself. They forget that rain resets everything. Diatomaceous earth washes off. After any rain, even a light rain, you need to reapply. This is not a failure of the product. Think of it the way you think of sunscreen. Sunscreen works beautifully until you go swimming. Then you need to put it on again. Diatomaceous earth works beautifully until it gets rained on. Then you put it on again, keep the bag close, make it a habit. Every time you see rain in the forecast, check whether your plants are still lightly dusted before and after. If the powder is gone, it got washed away and needs replacing. That's the full application. $2, 1 bag, dry plants, light coat, undersides of leaves, ring at the base, reapply after rain. Now let's talk about what this can become, because a single bag in a single garden is just the beginning. One gardener with 1 bag can protect a patch of tomatoes, peppers, and squash through an entire growing season. That same gardener with 3 bags, which costs less than a single bottle of chemical spray, can cover a full raised bed setup, protect an herb garden, treat a fruit tree's trunk and base soil, and still have powder left over for the houseplants sitting on the windowsill with fungus gnat problems. The math scales without limit. A family of 4 running a half-acre kitchen garden can protect every edible crop they grow for a summer for less than the cost of a single meal at a sit-down restaurant. And then, if you want to go further, if you are thinking about what real self-sufficiency looks like, diatomaceous earth plays a role that most people have no idea exists yet. In grain storage, ancient grain storage to be specific. For thousands of years, before anyone understood what a microscope was or what a diatom looked like, farmers in Egypt, China, and across Southeast Asia mixed silica-rich earth into stored grain to prevent insect infestation. The Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History has documented the use of mineral dusts in ancient Egyptian granary storage sites going back over 4,000 years. These farmers did not know the mechanism, they knew the result. Grain stored with the right powder stayed insect-free far longer than grain stored without it. They kept the knowledge. They passed it down. The knowledge still works today. Modern research at Kansas State University's Department of Grain Science confirmed that mixing small amounts of diatomaceous earth into stored grain at a ratio you can picture as roughly a small handful per large bucket of grain dramatically reduces insect populations in long-term storage without adding any chemical residue to the grain you later eat. For someone storing beans, wheat, corn, or rice for emergency use or for year-round self-sufficiency, this is not a curiosity. This is infrastructure. This is the difference between a 6-month supply of food that stays edible and a 6-month supply that becomes a weevil colony by month 3. There is one more thing about this powder that took a long time to surface, and it changes how you think about the entire problem of pest management, not just in your garden, but in every direction your self-sufficient life points. No bills, no infrastructure, no asking anyone's permission. The honest limitation is this: diatomaceous earth works best on soft-bodied and lightly armored insects. On very hard-shelled beetles, like June bugs for example, it works more slowly because the shell is thicker and takes longer to be worn through. It is not ineffective on hard-shelled insects, but it is slower. For those cases, applying the powder in a heavier band around the base of the plant so the beetle crosses more of it during its approach helps significantly. It also does not kill insects that never come into direct contact with it. Flying pests that land briefly and fly away may not get enough powder on them to cause dehydration. For those cases, think aphid colonies that arrived on wind. The key is catching the colony after it has settled and started walking on treated surfaces, which usually happens within a day or two of landing. This is not a total coverage barrier from the air down. It is a ground level and surface level defense. It is one part of a garden pest system, not the whole system by itself. But for every pest that crawls, that climbs a stem, that walks a soil trail, it is the most effective, cheapest, and most permanent tool in your hands. Every ancient civilization that discovered this, the Egyptians storing their harvest, the farmers of the Han Dynasty protecting their granaries, the traditional grain keepers of India using silica-rich ash to line their storage pits, they did not discover it because they were scientists. They discovered it because they were paying attention. They mixed certain earths into certain spaces and watched what stopped dying and what started surviving. The knowledge that came from watching is the same knowledge you are holding in a $2 bag right now. The reaction that killed their pests is still the same reaction. The physics has not changed. The diadem shells are the same shape they have always been, fossilized and waiting in deposits from California to Germany to China, ground into powder, bagged, and sitting on a shelf next to a bottle that costs 15 times as much, and will stop working the moment the insects that survived it teach their descendants how to live through it. That bottle has a shelf life. Your bag does not.